I stared at the termination notice Marcus Wright slid across his glass desk, the words "mandatory sabbatical" blurring as my heart pounded. 26 years old, and he was dismissing 18 years of my life at Premier National Bank. When I asked why, his response cut like ice. "You're too old for this tech, Belle. We need fresh perspectives." I nodded slowly, gathering my composure. "Okay, Marcus. I'm taking my legacy access with me then." His smirk faltered for just a moment before I walked out. 15 minutes later, every screen in the building displayed the same message. The setup and first betrayal. Walking through the marble lobby of Premier National Bank that Friday afternoon felt like a funeral march. 18 years of my life had been poured into these halls, starting as a 20-year-old junior programmer fresh out of Northwestern University. Now, at 38, I was being escorted out like a common criminal by Marcus Wright, a man I had personally trained during his internship 7 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. I remembered Marcus as an eager kid with thick glasses and nervous energy, constantly asking questions about our mainframe architecture. I had spent countless evenings explaining the intricacies of our legacy systems, teaching him how our security protocols worked, showing him the careful balance between innovation and stability that kept millions of dollars flowing safely through our networks every day. Now that same kid was telling me I was obsolete. My badge still worked at the parking garage, which struck me as odd. Usually, terminated employees lost all access immediately. As I sat in my Honda Accord, hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel, I couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was happening here. The past 6 months had been strange at Premier National. Senior employees kept disappearing. First, it was David Rodriguez from Risk Management, supposedly taking early retirement at 52. Then Patricia Williams from Compliance, who allegedly moved to Florida for family reasons. Each departure followed the same pattern: a sudden announcement, a brief goodbye email, and then silence. I pulled out my phone and called Janet Morrison, my friend in human resources. Janet had been with the company almost as long as I had, and if anyone knew what was really going on, it would be her. "Belle, thank God you called," Janet whispered when she picked up. "Can you meet me at Millennium Park in an hour? I can't talk here." The urgency in her voice sent chills down my spine. Janet was waiting by the bean sculpture, her usually perfect auburn hair disheveled dark circles under her green eyes. She looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. "This isn't about your age, Belle," she said without preamble. "Marcus submitted a workforce optimization plan to the board 3 months ago. He's systematically targeting anyone over 35 for elimination." My stomach dropped. "Why?" "Cost-cutting, supposedly. He wants to replace experienced employees with contractors who'll work for half the salary, but there's more." Janet glanced around nervously. "I've been tracking the departures. Every person he's removed had deep access to our core systems." The pieces started falling into place. David Rodriguez had managed our risk assessment algorithms. Patricia Williams oversaw regulatory compliance monitoring, and I controlled the mainframe architecture that everything else depended on. "He's not just cutting costs," I realized. "He's removing oversight." Janet nodded grimly. "I think Marcus is planning something big, and he needs experienced eyes out of the way. The annual security audit is next month, and suddenly all the people who would catch irregularities are gone." We sat in silence for a moment, watching tourists take photos with the reflective sculpture. The normalcy of the scene felt surreal against the conspiracy we were discussing. "There's something else," Janet continued. "Thomas Chen in security has been asking questions about after-hours access logs. He noticed unusual patterns but can't get straight answers from Marcus." Thomas Chen. I knew him well. A former Marine with an eye for detail and an unwavering sense of duty. If Thomas was concerned about security irregularities, there was definitely something to worry about. "What kind of patterns?" System access at strange hours, data transfers that don't match normal business operations. Thomas tried to bring it to Marcus's attention, but Marcus dismissed it as routine maintenance. I felt a familiar anger building in my chest. The same anger I felt when junior developers tried to cut corners on security protocols, or when executives pushed for flashy upgrades without understanding the underlying infrastructure. But this was worse. This was betrayal by someone I had trusted, someone I had mentored. Janet, I need you to do something for me. Can you check whether my system access is actually terminated? She pulled out her phone and logged into the HR portal. After a few taps, her eyebrows shot up. Belle, your access is still active. All of it. Even your administrative privileges. That confirmed my suspicion. Marcus was sloppy riding high on his newfound power and making mistakes. He probably assumed that removing me physically from the building was enough, not understanding that the systems I had built over 18 years had multiple layers and backup protocols. One more thing, I said, standing up. Can you get me Thomas's direct number? As I drove home to my Lincoln Park condo, my mind was racing. Marcus thought he could push out the old guard and reshape Premier National in his image. But he had made a critical error. He underestimated the value of institutional knowledge. I had built our current security architecture from the ground up. I knew every backdoor, every fail-safe, every redundancy. More importantly, I had designed multiple authentication layers that couldn't be easily bypassed without deep system knowledge. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Belle, this is Thomas Chen. Janet gave me your contact. We need to talk urgently. Can you meet me tonight? I smiled for the first time that day. Marcus might have thought he was clever, but he was about to learn why you don't mess with 18 years of accumulated expertise. The real game was just beginning. The investigation deepens. Thomas Chen suggested we meet at a small diner in Rogers Park, far from downtown, and any Premier National employees. When I arrived at 9 p.m., I found him sitting in a corner booth, his broad shoulders tense with worry. Even in civilian clothes, Thomas carried himself with military precision. Belle, I'm glad you agreed to meet, he said, standing to shake my hand. I've been trying to piece together what's happening at the bank, and your removal today was the final red flag I needed. I slid into the booth across from him. Janet mentioned unusual access patterns. Tell me what you found. Thomas opened a manila folder and spread several printed reports across the table. For the past 4 months, I've been documenting system access anomalies. Marcus has been logging into the system almost every night between 2 and 4 a.m. He pointed to highlighted entries on the access logs. This isn't normal administrative work, Belle. He's accessing customer account databases, transaction records, and international wire transfer logs. When I asked him about it, he claimed he was optimizing system performance. I studied the reports, my programmer's mind immediately recognizing suspicious patterns. Thomas, these access times coincide with international market hours in Asia and Eastern Europe. If someone wanted to extract and sell financial data, this would be the perfect window. That's exactly what I thought. But it gets worse. Thomas pulled out another set of documents. I started monitoring data transfer volumes during his sessions. We're talking about massive amounts of information being copied to external drives. The implications hit me like a physical blow. He's stealing customer data. I think so, but I can't prove it because he's using administrative privileges to alter the logs after each session. By morning, the evidence disappears. I felt my jaw clench. Marcus wasn't just destroying careers. He was potentially compromising the financial security of hundreds of thousands of customers. Thomas, I need to access our systems remotely. Can you cover for any alerts that might trigger? Your access should still be active, he confirmed. Marcus doesn't understand our security infrastructure well enough to properly revoke your privileges. But Belle, if you're caught accessing the system after being terminated, they could press criminal charges. Let them try. I said grimly. If Marcus is selling customer data, that's a federal crime. I'd rather risk my freedom than let him destroy innocent people's lives. Thomas nodded approvingly. I have a contact at the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Detective Ray Sullivan. We served together in Afghanistan. If we can build a solid case, he'll know how to handle it. I left the diner with a new sense of purpose. Back in my condo, I set up my home workstation and initiated a secure remote connection to Premier National's servers. My 18 years of system development had included multiple backdoor access points for emergency situations. Marcus might control the front door, but I still held the keys to the house. The first thing I noticed was that Marcus had indeed been busy. New user accounts had been created with suspicious naming conventions, random alphanumeric strings rather than standard employee identifiers. These accounts had elevated privileges but no corresponding personnel records. I began tracing the data access patterns Thomas had identified. Marcus's late-night sessions were even more extensive than the logs suggested. He was systematically copying customer account information, transaction histories, and personal identification data. But the destination of these transfers was encrypted and routed through multiple servers. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Marcus hadn't just been stealing data, he had been modifying it. Transaction records were being altered, account balances adjusted, and international wire transfers were being rerouted through accounts I didn't recognize. I spent the next 3 hours documenting everything, taking screenshots, and creating backup copies of the evidence. But as I dug deeper, I discovered something that shocked me even more than the theft itself. Marcus wasn't working alone. The modified transactions all led back to a series of cryptocurrency wallets. Following the digital breadcrumbs, I traced payments totaling over $2 million flowing into these accounts over the past 6 months. But the payments weren't just going to Marcus. Using my administrative access to the bank's executive financial records, a privilege I'd earned through years of trusted service, I discovered that similar cryptocurrency payments had been made to another familiar account. Robert Hawkins, chairman of the board of directors, was receiving payments from the same source. I sat back in my chair, stunned. This wasn't just a rogue employee stealing data. This was a coordinated conspiracy involving the highest levels of bank leadership. My phone buzzed with a message from Thomas. Ray Sullivan wants to meet tomorrow. Can you bring evidence? I replied immediately. Yes. And Thomas, it's bigger than we thought. Much bigger. The next morning, I met Thomas and Detective Ray Sullivan at a Starbucks near Northwestern University. Ray was a tall, lean man with intelligent brown eyes and prematurely gray hair. He listened intently as I explained what I had discovered, occasionally asking technical questions that showed he understood the implications. Belle, what you're describing sounds like a sophisticated cybercrime operation, Ray said after reviewing my printed evidence. If the bank's chairman is involved, this could be part of a larger financial fraud network. How do we proceed? Thomas asked. Ray leaned forward, lowering his voice. First, Belle, you need to stop accessing the bank's systems immediately. If they detect your activity, they'll change security protocols and destroy evidence. Second, I need to bring this to the federal task force investigating financial cybercrime. This is way beyond local jurisdiction. But if I stop monitoring their activities, they could accelerate whatever they're planning, I protested. That's a risk we have to take. What you've uncovered is enough to start a formal investigation, but we need to do this by the book. I understood the logic, but it felt wrong to step back when I was so close to exposing the full scope of Marcus and Hawkins's operation. However, Ray was right about the legal implications. If I was caught accessing the system after being formally terminated, any evidence I gathered might be inadmissible in court. There is one thing I can do, I said slowly. I built monitoring routines into our security architecture that automatically log unusual activities. Even if Marcus deletes the obvious traces, these deeper logs would be much harder for him to find and erase. Ray's eyes lit up. Can you activate these monitoring routines without directly accessing the system? They're already active. I built them as permanent safeguards years ago. The question is whether Marcus is sophisticated enough to know they exist. Thomas smiled grimly. Given what we've seen of his technical skills, I doubt it. He's operating above his competence level. Over the next week, I received regular updates from Thomas about suspicious activities at the bank. Marcus had accelerated his data extraction efforts, working longer hours and accessing more sensitive systems. But he had also grown paranoid, installing new security cameras in the server room and requiring additional authentication for certain systems. Meanwhile, Ray Sullivan had briefed his federal task force colleagues. Within days, the FBI had opened a formal investigation into Premier National Bank. But they needed more evidence to obtain search warrants, and they needed to be certain they could trace the money trail all the way to its source. That's when I had an idea that would either expose the entire conspiracy or land me in federal prison. If Marcus was going to steal data, I was going to make sure he stole exactly what I wanted him to steal. The conspiracy unfolds. Creating a digital honey trap required all of my 18 years of experience and a level of precision I'd never attempted before. I had to plant false valuable data that Marcus would find irresistible while ensuring I could trace exactly where it went and who accessed it. Using my remaining backdoor access, I created what appeared to be a new high-value client account, a fictional technology executive with a personal net worth of $50 million. The account contained transaction histories, investment portfolios, and personal information that would be incredibly valuable to identity thieves or financial fraudsters. But every piece of data was subtly tagged with invisible digital watermarks that would allow law enforcement to track its movement through any network. If Marcus stole this information, we would have an unbreakable chain of evidence leading directly to him and his co-conspirators. I had just finished implementing the trap when my phone rang. It was Janet Morrison, and she sounded terrified. "Belle, you need to know something. Marcus just called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. He's claiming there's been a security breach and that you're responsible for sabotaging the bank's systems." My heart sank. He's trying to frame me. It gets worse. He's brought in outside security consultants who are saying the breach originated from your remote access. They want to have you arrested. This was exactly what Ray Sullivan had warned me about. Marcus was covering his tracks by making me the scapegoat. But I had one advantage he didn't know about. I had anticipated this move. "Janet, I need you to listen carefully. Tomorrow morning before the board meeting, I want you to call Thomas and tell him to check the server room security footage from last Tuesday night, specifically the timestamps between 2 and 4 a.m. What happened Tuesday night? Marcus accessed my workstation in person and planted evidence to make it look like I had been accessing systems inappropriately. But what he doesn't know is that I had Angela Martinez install motion-activated cameras in that room 2 months ago. Angela Martinez was a junior developer. I had been mentoring a brilliant 24-year-old with a master's degree in cybersecurity from DePaul University. I had been teaching her advanced system architecture, and she had been helping me upgrade our physical security protocols. "Belle, if you have evidence that Marcus planted false information, why haven't you used it already?" "Because I wanted to see how far he would go. Now I know. He's willing to destroy innocent employees to cover his crimes." That evening, I received a call from Angela. Her voice was shaking with anger and fear. "Belle, Marcus cornered me today and demanded I sign a statement saying you had asked me to plant malicious code in our systems. When I refused, he threatened to have me fired and blacklisted from the industry." "What did you tell him?" "I told him to go straight to hell," she said, her voice growing stronger. Then I went to Thomas and gave him copies of all our correspondence. "Belle, I've been documenting everything you taught me, including the security upgrades and the monitoring systems we installed together. Angela, I need you to be very careful. Marcus is dangerous and he has powerful allies." "I know. But Belle, you saved my career when I was struggling as a new developer. You taught me everything I know about system architecture and cybersecurity. I'm not going to let him destroy you with lies." The next morning arrived with a surprise I hadn't anticipated. Detective Ray Sullivan called me at 6 a.m. with urgent news. "Belle, our investigation took a major turn overnight. We've been monitoring the cryptocurrency wallets you identified, and they've received over $5 million in payments from accounts linked to Russian cybercrime syndicates." I felt my blood turn to ice. "Marcus is working with foreign criminals." "It appears so, but it gets more complicated. We've identified similar payment patterns at 4 other banks across the Midwest. This isn't just about Premier National. Marcus and Hawkins are part of a larger operation targeting American financial institutions." The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Marcus hadn't just been stealing customer data for personal gain. He was part of an organized effort to destabilize American banking security. "Ray, there's something else you need to know. Marcus has called an emergency board meeting this morning to have me arrested. He's claiming I'm responsible for security breaches." "Perfect," Ray said, surprising me. "That's exactly what we need." "How is that perfect?" "Because it forces him to make his accusations public in front of witnesses, while we have evidence proving he's the actual perpetrator." "Belle, I need you to attend that board meeting." "Are you insane? He'll have me arrested on the spot." "No, he won't, because I'll be there with federal agents and arrest warrants for Marcus Wright and Robert Hawkins." My hands were trembling as I hung up the phone. After 18 years at Premier National Bank, my career was about to end in the most dramatic way possible. I arrived at the bank at 9 a.m., walking through the marble lobby one more time. Employees stared at me with confusion and concern. Many of them had worked with me for years and couldn't understand why I was suddenly considered a security threat. The boardroom on the 32nd floor overlooked downtown Chicago, with floor-to-ceiling windows providing a panoramic view of Lake Michigan. Under normal circumstances, I would have paused to appreciate the beauty of the city I loved. Today, I was focused entirely on the battle ahead. Marcus was already there wearing an expensive Navy suit and speaking confidently with several board members. When he saw me, his expression shifted from surprise to anger. "What is she doing here?" he demanded. "I invited her," said Thomas Chen, who had entered behind me. "As Chief Security Officer, I have the right to have all relevant parties present when discussing security breaches." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Thomas, you don't have the authority to override my decisions regarding terminated employees." "Actually, I do," Thomas replied calmly. "Especially when those decisions involve potential criminal activity." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Board members looked confused and concerned. They had been promised a simple explanation for recent security issues, not a confrontation between senior employees. Robert Hawkins entered the room at exactly 9:30, his silver hair perfectly styled and his demeanor projecting authority and control. At 72, he had been chairman of the board for 12 years and was widely respected in Chicago's financial community. What the other board members didn't know was that I had spent the past week documenting his cryptocurrency transactions and offshore account activities. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hawkins began, "we're here to address a serious security breach that threatens the integrity of our institution. Marcus has discovered evidence that former employee Belle Morrison has been accessing our systems illegally and compromising customer data." Marcus stood and activated a presentation screen displaying what appeared to be access logs showing my username connecting to various systems over the past week. "As you can see," Marcus said, his voice confident and professional, "Belle has been using her former credentials to access sensitive customer information. We believe she may be working with external parties to steal financial data." I felt my heart pounding, but I forced myself to remain calm. Everything was proceeding exactly as Ray Sullivan had predicted. "That's a serious accusation," said board member Patricia Hamilton, a lawyer who had served on the board for 8 years. "Belle, How do you respond to these allegations? Before I could answer, the boardroom doors opened and Detective Ray Sullivan entered, followed by 3 FBI agents in dark suits. "Nobody move," Ray announced, his voice carrying the authority of federal law enforcement. "This is now a federal crime scene." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Marcus's confident expression crumbled, replaced by confusion and growing panic. Ray approached Marcus directly. "Marcus Wright, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit financial fraud, unauthorized access to computer systems, and conspiracy to sell protected customer information to foreign entities." As the handcuffs clicked around Marcus's wrists, Robert Hawkins stood up indignantly. "Detective, this is outrageous. You're arresting the wrong person. Belle Morrison is the one who's been stealing data." Ray turned to Hawkins with a cold smile. "Robert Hawkins, you're also under arrest for conspiracy to commit financial fraud and money laundering through cryptocurrency accounts linked to Russian cybercrime syndicates." The shock on Hawkins' face was absolute. For a moment, the powerful chairman looked like nothing more than a frightened old man who had been caught in a lie. As federal agents read both men their rights, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The conspiracy that had threatened to destroy my career and compromise thousands of innocent customers was finally exposed. But the real satisfaction came from knowing that Marcus's own arrogance and greed had been his downfall. He thought he could outsmart 18 years of experience and institutional knowledge. He had been catastrophically wrong. The trap is set. The arrest of Marcus Wright and Robert Hawkins sent shockwaves through Premier National Bank and Chicago's financial community. Within hours, local news stations were reporting on the federal charges, and the bank's stock price dropped 12% in after-hours trading. But my work wasn't finished. Detective Ray Sullivan explained that while they had enough evidence to charge Marcus and Hawkins, the FBI needed additional proof to dismantle the larger cybercrime network they had been working with. "Belle," Ray said as we sat in the bank's conference room after the arrests, "your honey trap worked perfectly. Marcus accessed your fake client account yesterday evening and transmitted the information to the same cryptocurrency network we've been monitoring. So we can trace exactly where the data went. Better than that, the digital watermarks you embedded led us to a server farm in Estonia that's been coordinating financial data theft across multiple countries. Your evidence is helping us build cases against cybercriminals in 6 different nations." Thomas Chen joined our conversation, looking relieved but exhausted. "Belle, there's something else you need to know. Angela Martinez has been helping me analyze the security footage from the server room. We have clear video evidence of Marcus planting false files on your workstation." I felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. Marcus had been someone I trusted and mentored. Watching him destroy himself through greed and betrayal was painful, even though justice demanded he be held accountable. "What happens now?" I asked. Ray consulted his notes. "The federal task force will need your testimony in several cases. Marcus and Hawkins are cooperating with investigators in exchange for reduced sentences, so we're learning about cybercrime operations we didn't even know existed. And Premier National. The bank will face significant regulatory scrutiny and fines, but they're cooperating fully with the investigation. Thomas has been promoted to Chief Security Officer, and they'll need to completely overhaul their cybersecurity infrastructure." As we talked, I noticed Angela Martinez standing hesitantly in the doorway. She had been crying, her usually bright demeanor subdued by the trauma of recent events. "Belle, can I talk to you privately?" she asked. We walked to my old office, which had been sealed by federal agents but was now accessible again. 18 years of memories were scattered across my desk. Photos with colleagues' awards for innovation, handwritten thank you notes from employees I had mentored. "I'm so sorry," Angela began, her voice breaking. If I had been braver, if I had spoken up sooner about the things Marcus was asking me to do, maybe none of this would have happened. I put a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Angela, you did exactly the right thing. You stood up to someone in power when it mattered most. That takes tremendous courage." but I almost signed that false statement. For a moment, I actually considered it because I was scared of losing my job. But you didn't sign it. When it mattered, you chose integrity over fear. That's what defines character." Angela wiped her eyes and managed a small smile. "Belle, I learned more from you in 2 years than from 4 years of college computer science courses. You taught me that technology isn't just about code and algorithms. It's about protecting people and serving something larger than ourselves." Her words touched me more deeply than any professional recognition I had ever received. Mentoring young developers like Angela had always been one of the most rewarding aspects of my career. Over the next week, the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. Marcus and Hawkins had been part of a sophisticated operation targeting regional banks across the Midwest. The cybercriminals had specifically recruited young, ambitious executives who could be corrupted with promises of easy money and rapid career advancement. The pattern was always the same: identify banks with aging cybersecurity infrastructure, place a compromised executive in a position of authority, systematically remove experienced employees who might detect unusual activities, and then extract customer data for sale to identity thieves and financial fraudsters. Premier National had been their most successful target, generating over $8 million in stolen customer data over 18 months. But their success had also made them overconfident and sloppy. The irony, Ray explained during one of our debriefing sessions, is that Marcus's ageism actually protected the bank. If he had kept you and other experienced employees, he could have operated undetected for years. But removing institutional knowledge made his activities obvious to anyone who understood the systems. The media attention was intense, but ultimately positive. Rather than focusing on the scandal, most news outlets emphasized how experienced employees had exposed the conspiracy and protected customers. Several articles specifically highlighted the value of retaining older workers in technology fields. I was invited to testify before a congressional subcommittee on cybersecurity, where I explained how institutional knowledge and deep system understanding were crucial for detecting sophisticated financial crimes. The attackers in this case specifically targeted experienced employees for removal, I told the congressman. They understood that expertise and institutional memory were their greatest threats. Organizations that devalue experienced workers are making themselves vulnerable to exactly these kinds of attacks. The hearing generated significant media coverage and led to several other companies reviewing their policies regarding age discrimination in technology fields. 3 months after the arrests, I received an unexpected phone call from Catherine Woods, the new CEO of Premier National Bank. The board had dismissed the previous CEO for failing to detect the conspiracy despite multiple warning signs. "Belle, I'd like to offer you the position of Chief Information Security Officer," Catherine said. "We need someone with your experience and integrity to rebuild trust in our cybersecurity operations." The offer was tempting, a significant promotion with the authority to implement cutting-edge security protocols. But I had already made a different decision about my future. "Catherine, I appreciate the offer, but I've decided to start my own cybersecurity consulting firm. I want to help other financial institutions avoid what happened here." "I understand completely. In that case, I'd like Premier National to be your first client. We need external expertise to validate our new security infrastructure." 6 months after my forced termination, I was sitting in the same boardroom where Marcus had tried to have me arrested, but now I was there as an independent consultant commanding premium rates for my expertise. Angela Martinez had been promoted to senior security analyst and was working directly with my consulting team. Thomas Chen had transformed the bank's security culture, implementing protocols that valued experience alongside innovation. During our first quarterly security review, Angela made a presentation about new threat detection algorithms she had developed. Her work was sophisticated and innovative, building on the foundation I had taught her while incorporating cutting-edge machine learning techniques. The key insight, she explained to the board, is that cybersecurity isn't just about having the latest technology. It's about understanding how systems interact over time and recognizing patterns that only come from experience. As I listened to her presentation, I realized that my greatest victory wasn't exposing Marcus's conspiracy or saving the bank millions of dollars in potential losses. It was knowing that the knowledge and values I had spent 18 years developing would continue through the people I had mentored. Marcus had been right about one thing: the technology industry needed fresh perspectives and new ideas. But he had been catastrophically wrong in thinking that meant discarding experience and institutional knowledge. The most powerful cybersecurity came from combining youthful innovation with mature wisdom, exactly what Angela was demonstrating in her presentation. After the meeting, Catherine Woods pulled me aside. "Belle, I want you to know that your actions didn't just save our bank. They've changed how our entire industry thinks about cybersecurity and employee retention." She was right. In the months following the Premier National scandal, several other banks had discovered similar conspiracies targeting experienced employees. My testimony had helped law enforcement agencies develop new protocols for investigating financial cybercrime. But perhaps most importantly, the case had sparked a broader conversation about ageism in technology and the dangerous consequences of devaluing experienced workers. Marcus Wright had thought he was eliminating obstacles to his grand plan. Instead, he had awakened a sleeping giant. The collective institutional knowledge of experienced professionals who refuse to be dismissed or discarded. The confrontation escalates. The federal trial of Marcus Wright and Robert Hawkins began 8 months after their arrest, drawing national media attention as one of the largest financial cybercrime cases in recent history. I was called as the prosecution's key witness, tasked with explaining the technical aspects of the conspiracy to a jury of ordinary citizens. Walking into the federal courthouse in downtown Chicago brought back memories of my testimony before Congress, but this felt different. Here, justice would finally be served for the customers whose personal information had been stolen and the employees whose careers had been destroyed. Marcus sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, a stark contrast to the expensive suits he used to wear as CTO. His confident demeanor had been replaced by nervous fidgeting and hollow eyes. Prison had not been kind to him. Robert Hawkins, seated beside his high-powered defense attorney, maintained the dignified bearing that had served him well as board chairman. But I could see the fear behind his composed facade. At 72, he faced the possibility of spending his remaining years behind bars. The prosecution, led by federal prosecutor Jennifer Walsh, had built an airtight case. Beyond my technical evidence, they had financial records, recorded conversations, and testimony from other cybercrime victims across multiple states.
"Ms. Morrison,"
Prosecutor Walsh began during my direct examination, "please explain to the jury how you first discovered the defendant's criminal activities." I spent the next 2 hours walking the jury through the technical details of Marcus's data theft operation, explaining how he had used his administrative privileges to access customer information and sell it to foreign criminals. The defendants made a critical error, I concluded. They assumed that removing experienced employees would eliminate oversight. But they didn't understand that cybersecurity systems are designed with multiple layers of monitoring and verification. Their activities left digital fingerprints that couldn't be erased. During cross-examination, Marcus's defense attorney tried to portray me as a disgruntled former employee seeking revenge. But the evidence was too overwhelming for that strategy to succeed. "Ms. Morrison, isn't it true that you were bitter about being terminated and wanted to damage the bank's reputation?" "No," I replied calmly. "I was concerned about protecting customer data and preventing financial crimes. My personal feelings were irrelevant compared to the potential harm to innocent people. The defense attorney pressed further. But you admit that you accessed the bank's systems after your termination, which could be considered unauthorized computer access. I used legitimate access credentials that hadn't been properly revoked. More importantly, I used that access to document criminal activity and protect customer information. If that's unauthorized, then I'm proud to have done it. The jury nodded approvingly. Even without technical expertise, they could understand the moral distinction between accessing systems to commit crimes versus accessing them to prevent crimes. Hawkins's defense strategy was more sophisticated. His attorney argued that he had been manipulated by Marcus and wasn't fully aware of the criminal nature of their activities. Mr. Hawkins is a respected businessman who made poor decisions but didn't intend to commit crimes, his attorney argued during opening statements. He trusted Marcus Wright's technical expertise and didn't understand the full implications of their arrangement. But Prosecutor Walsh had prepared for this defense. During the second week of trial, she presented evidence showing that Hawkins had received detailed briefings about the source of the cryptocurrency payments he was receiving. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Walsh said during her closing argument, Mr. Hawkins knew exactly what he was doing. He received regular reports showing that the money he was being paid came from the sale of stolen American customer data to foreign criminals. This wasn't a mistake or poor judgment. This was deliberate betrayal of his fiduciary duty. The evidence against both defendants was overwhelming. Bank security footage showed Marcus accessing my workstation to plant false evidence. Financial records proved Hawkins had received over $3 million from cryptocurrency accounts linked to Russian cybercrime syndicates. Digital forensics confirmed that customer data had been systematically stolen and sold over an 18-month period. Most damaging was a recorded conversation between Marcus and Hawkins that had been captured by FBI surveillance. In it, Marcus explicitly discussed cleaning house of experienced employees who might detect their activities, while Hawkins expressed concern about maximizing profits before anyone catches on. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Marcus Wright was convicted of conspiracy to commit financial fraud, unauthorized access to computer systems wire fraud, and conspiracy to sell protected customer information to foreign entities. Robert Hawkins was convicted of conspiracy to commit financial fraud, money laundering, and violation of fiduciary duty. During the sentencing phase 2 months later, I was again called to testify about the impact of their crimes on customers and employees. "Your Honor," I said, addressing Judge Patricia Martinez, "the defendants didn't just steal money or data, they attacked the foundation of trust that makes banking possible. Customers deposit their savings and share their personal information because they believe it will be protected. When bank executives betray that trust, they undermine the entire financial system." I also spoke about the human cost of their conspiracy. The defendants systematically targeted experienced employees for removal, destroying careers, and discarding institutional knowledge. Their actions sent a message that experience and expertise have no value, which is both economically destructive and morally wrong. Judge Martinez sentenced Marcus Wright to 15 years in federal prison, calling his crimes a profound betrayal of the public trust. Robert Hawkins received a 20-year sentence, with the judge noting that his position as board chairman carried greater responsibility and that his age and experience made his crimes even more inexcusable. "Mr. Hawkins," Judge Martinez said during sentencing, "you had a fiduciary duty to protect the interests of the bank's customers and shareholders. Instead, you conspired with foreign criminals to steal from the very people who trusted you with their financial security. Your actions represent corporate leadership at its absolute worst." Outside the courthouse after sentencing, I was surrounded by reporters asking for my reaction to the verdicts. Justice has been served, I said simply, but the real victory is that this case has highlighted the importance of cybersecurity expertise and the value of experienced workers in protecting our financial institutions. One reporter asked whether I felt vindicated by the outcome. This was never about vindication, I replied. It was about protecting innocent people and holding criminals accountable. Marcus Wright and Robert Hawkins chose greed over duty, and now they'll face the consequences of that choice. Angela Martinez, who had also testified during the trial, joined me on the courthouse steps. She had been promoted to Director of Cybersecurity at Premier National and was considered one of the rising stars in the field. Belle, I wanted to thank you again, she said. Everything you taught me about integrity and professional responsibility helped me make the right choices when it mattered most. As we walked away from the courthouse, I reflected on how much had changed since that Friday afternoon, when Marcus told me I was too old for this tech. His arrogance and ageism had led him to underestimate the power of experience and institutional knowledge. The cybercrime network that Marcus and Hawkins had been part of was now largely dismantled. FBI investigations had led to arrests in 6 countries, and new international cooperation protocols were being developed to combat financial cybercrime. More importantly, the case had sparked industry-wide changes in how financial institutions approached cybersecurity and employee retention. Several major banks had implemented new policies protecting experienced workers from age discrimination. Professional organizations were developing training programs that emphasized the importance of combining technological innovation with institutional knowledge. The phrase, "too old for this tech," had become synonymous with the dangerous arrogance that had allowed cybercriminals to infiltrate American financial institutions. Marcus Wright had been wrong about almost everything, but he had been especially wrong about one fundamental principle in cybersecurity: experience isn't a liability to be discarded. It's an asset to be treasured and leveraged. The criminals had learned that lesson the hard way. Justice begins. The convictions of Marcus Wright and Robert Hawkins marked the beginning of a broader transformation in the financial services industry's approach to cybersecurity and employee retention. Within weeks of the sentencing, I received calls from federal agencies, congressional committees, and major corporations seeking my expertise on preventing similar conspiracies. The FBI's Financial Crimes Task Force had used evidence from the Premier National case to expose a far-reaching cybercrime network operating across multiple countries. Detective Ray Sullivan, who had been promoted to lead the task force, briefed me on the scope of their discoveries. "Belle, your investigation opened doors we didn't even know existed," Ray explained during a meeting at the federal building. "The cryptocurrency wallets you identified led us to server farms in Eastern Europe that were coordinating data theft from dozens of American financial institutions. How many other banks were targeted?" "At least 12 that we've confirmed with potential losses exceeding $50 million in stolen customer information." But here's the remarkable part. In every case, the criminals used the same strategy Marcus employed. They placed corrupt executives in positions of power and systematically removed experienced employees who might detect suspicious activities. The pattern was both disturbing and validating. My experience at Premier National wasn't unique. It was part of a coordinated assault on American financial security that specifically exploited ageism and institutional knowledge gaps. "The international cooperation aspect is unprecedented," Ray continued. "Based on your evidence, we're working with law enforcement in Estonia, Romania, and the Czech Republic to dismantle money laundering operations that have been running for over 3 years. 2 months after the trial, I was invited to testify before the Senate Banking Committee about cybersecurity vulnerabilities in financial institutions. The hearing room was packed with industry executives, cybersecurity experts, and media representatives. Senator Elizabeth Harrison, the committee chairwoman, opened the hearing by emphasizing the broader implications of the Premier National case. Ms. Morrison's experience demonstrates how age discrimination and the devaluation of institutional knowledge can create critical security vulnerabilities that threaten our entire financial system. During my testimony, I explained how the attackers had specifically targeted the intersection of technological capability and human psychology. They understood that removing experienced employees would create knowledge gaps that could be exploited. This wasn't just about stealing data. It was about weakening the human infrastructure that protects our financial institutions. I recommended several policy changes to prevent similar attacks. Mandatory cybersecurity training for all bank executives, federal guidelines protecting experienced workers from discriminatory removal, and requirements for independent security audits when senior technical staff are terminated. The criminals succeeded because they understood something many executives don't, I concluded. Cybersecurity isn't just about technology, it's about people. Organizations that devalue experience and institutional knowledge are making themselves vulnerable to exactly these kinds of sophisticated attacks. The hearing generated significant media coverage and led directly to new federal regulations requiring enhanced oversight of personnel changes at financial institutions. Meanwhile, my cybersecurity consulting firm was growing rapidly. The premier national case had established my reputation as someone who could detect and prevent sophisticated financial crimes. Major banks across the country were hiring me to audit their security protocols and personnel policies. One of my most interesting cases involved First Midwest Bank in Milwaukee, where executives had noticed unusual patterns similar to those that had preceded the premier national conspiracy. Their chief technology officer, a 30-year-old named Kevin Thompson, had been systematically replacing senior staff with younger contractors. We started getting concerned when 3 of our most experienced security analysts left within 2 months, explained CEO Margaret Collins during our initial meeting. Each departure followed the same pattern. Suddenly they were told their skills were outdated and they needed to find new opportunities. I spent 2 weeks conducting a comprehensive audit of First Midwest's systems and personnel changes. What I discovered was chilling. Kevin Thompson had implemented almost identical strategies to those Marcus Wright had used, including late-night system access, unauthorized data transfers, and the creation of phantom user accounts. But this time we caught the conspiracy before significant damage occurred. Working with the FBI task force, we gathered evidence that led to Thompson's arrest and the exposure of his connection to the same international cybercrime network that Marcus and Hawkins had worked with. The criminals are definitely getting bolder, Ray Sullivan told me after Thompson's arrest. They're trying to replicate the premier national model at other institutions, but they're also getting sloppy because they think they understand how to exploit organizational weaknesses. The second Midwest case reinforced my growing understanding of how these attacks operated. The cybercriminals had developed a sophisticated playbook for infiltrating American banks, and age discrimination was a crucial component of their strategy. By targeting experienced employees for removal, corrupt executives could eliminate the people most likely to detect unusual activities. Younger, less experienced workers were easier to manipulate or deceive, especially if they lacked the institutional knowledge to recognize when systems were being misused. But the criminals had made a crucial miscalculation. They assumed that removing experienced employees would eliminate all institutional knowledge. They didn't understand that cybersecurity professionals like myself had built monitoring systems and knowledge transfer protocols specifically designed to survive personnel changes. They thought experience was a weakness to be exploited. I explained during a cybersecurity conference in Las Vegas 6 months after the premier national trial. They failed to realize that experience is actually a strength that can be leveraged even when experienced employees are no longer directly involved. My consulting work expanded beyond individual bank audits to include industry-wide policy development. The American Bankers Association hired me to develop new cybersecurity guidelines that emphasize the value of experienced workers while also incorporating innovative technologies. The goal isn't to exclude young workers or resist technological change, I explained to the ABA board. It's to create environments where innovation and experience can work together to create stronger security protocols. The guidelines I developed became industry standards implemented by hundreds of financial institutions across the country. They required enhanced background checks for senior technology executives, mandatory consultation with experienced staff before major personnel changes, and independent audits of cybersecurity protocols whenever key employees were terminated. Perhaps most importantly, the guidelines established formal mentorship programs pairing experienced cybersecurity professionals with younger colleagues. These programs ensured that institutional knowledge would be preserved and transferred even during normal personnel transitions. Angela Martinez became one of the first graduates of these mentorship programs, eventually starting her own cybersecurity consulting firm focused on helping smaller financial institutions implement enterprise-level security protocols. Bell taught me that cybersecurity is about more than just technology, Angela said during the launch announcement for her company. It's about understanding how systems interact with human behavior over time. That kind of understanding only comes from experience combined with continuous learning. The success of these programs led to broader industry recognition of the value of experienced workers in technology fields. Several major corporations outside the banking industry implemented similar policies, and age discrimination complaints in technology decreased significantly. But perhaps the most satisfying development was the impact on cybercrime prevention. The international task force that had grown out of the premier national investigation successfully disrupted criminal networks in 12 countries, recovering over $30 million in stolen funds and preventing countless additional crimes. Ms. Morrison's initial investigation created a domino effect that's still generating results 2 years later. Ray Sullivan said during a press conference announcing the latest arrests. The criminals thought they had found a sustainable model for exploiting American financial institutions. Instead, they discovered that experienced cybersecurity professionals don't give up easily. The cybercrime network that Marcus Wright and Robert Hawkins had been part of was now largely dismantled. But more importantly, the banking industry had developed new defenses specifically designed to prevent similar attacks. Experience had triumphed over arrogance. Institutional knowledge had proven more valuable than trendy innovation, and justice had been served not just for individual criminals, but for the systematic thinking that had enabled their crimes. Marcus Wright had been wrong about almost everything, but his biggest mistake was underestimating the power of experience and the determination of people who refused to be discarded or dismissed. Resolution and life lesson. 2 years after my forced departure from Premier National Bank, I stood before an audience of 500 cybersecurity professionals at the annual Financial Technology Security Conference in San Francisco. The conference organizers had asked me to deliver the keynote address about the evolution of cybersecurity threats and the crucial role of institutional knowledge in defending against sophisticated attacks. Looking out at the diverse audience, young programmers eager to make their mark, seasoned professionals with decades of experience, and executives responsible for protecting billions of dollars in assets. I reflected on how much had changed since that Friday afternoon when Marcus Wright told me I was too old for this tech. 3 years ago, I was forced to take early retirement because a 26-year-old executive believed that experience was a liability in cybersecurity. I began. Today, I stand before you as the CEO of Morrison Cybersecurity Solutions, a firm that has helped prevent over $100 million in financial crimes by combining cutting-edge technology with institutional wisdom. The applause was warm and sustained, but I raised my hand to continue. However, this story isn't about personal vindication. It's about a fundamental truth that our industry must embrace. Cybersecurity is not just about having the latest tools or the newest algorithms. It's about understanding how systems behave over time, recognizing patterns that emerge from years of observation and developing the judgment that only comes from experience. I walked through the technical details of the premier national conspiracy, explaining how Marcus Wright and Robert Hawkins had exploited organizational psychology as much as technological vulnerabilities. The attackers understood something that many executives miss. Removing experienced employees doesn't just eliminate oversight. It destroys the institutional memory that makes sophisticated pattern recognition possible. In the 2 years since the trial, my consulting firm had grown to employ 47 cybersecurity professionals, including 12 former executives who had been forced out of their positions due to age discrimination. We had developed innovative approaches to threat detection that combined artificial intelligence with human expertise, creating security protocols that were both technologically advanced and operationally wise. Our most successful projects occur when we pair experienced professionals with brilliant young developers, I explained. Angela Martinez, who now runs our financial crimes prevention division, has developed machine learning algorithms that can detect data theft patterns I taught her to recognize through 18 years of hands-on experience. The combination of her technical innovation and my institutional knowledge has created capabilities that neither of us could achieve alone. Angela was sitting in the front row, now 27, and already recognized as one of the top cybersecurity experts in the Midwest. She had testified before Congress, twice helped design federal cybersecurity regulations, and won numerous industry awards for her innovative threat detection systems. "Bell saved my career twice," Angela had said during a recent interview with Cybersecurity Weekly. "First, she taught me that technology must serve human purposes, not the other way around. Second, she showed me that standing up for principles is more important than keeping your job. Those lessons shaped everything I do professionally." The premier national case had become a landmark in both cybersecurity and employment law. Marcus Wright was serving his 15-year sentence in federal prison, where he reportedly spent his time teaching computer literacy classes to other inmates. Robert Hawkins had died in prison 8 months into his 20-year sentence, bringing a sad but final end to his involvement in the conspiracy. More importantly, the case had triggered industry-wide changes that protected both institutions and experienced workers. The Morrison-Martinez cybersecurity framework, developed jointly by my firm and Angela's team, was now used by over 300 financial institutions across North America. The framework recognizes that cybersecurity requires both innovation and institutional memory, I explained to the conference audience. Young professionals bring fresh perspectives and cutting-edge technical skills. Experienced professionals contribute pattern recognition, operational wisdom, and the deep system knowledge that comes from years of hands-on problem-solving. The framework had prevented 12 documented cybercrime attempts in its first year of implementation. More significantly, it had changed how the industry thought about workforce development and knowledge transfer. Thomas Chen, now Chief Information Officer at Premier National Bank, had implemented comprehensive mentorship programs that paired senior and junior employees on all major projects. "We learned that knowledge transfer isn't just about documentation," he said during a panel discussion at the same conference. "It's about creating relationships where experienced professionals can pass along not just technical information, but judgment and intuition." The cultural impact extended beyond cybersecurity. Major technology companies had begun implementing age discrimination protection policies specifically designed to retain institutional knowledge. Several universities had developed joint degree programs combining computer science with organizational psychology. Recognizing that modern cybersecurity required understanding both technical and human systems, the criminals who targeted Premier National made a crucial error in judgment. I continued my keynote address. They assumed that age and experience were weaknesses to be exploited. They failed to understand that in cybersecurity, experience is one of our most powerful weapons. I paused to look directly at the younger professionals in the audience. To the brilliant young developers here today, your energy, innovation, and fresh perspectives are absolutely crucial to our industry's future. We need your creativity and your willingness to challenge conventional thinking. But don't make Marcus Wright's mistake of believing that innovation requires discarding wisdom. Then I addressed the experienced professionals. To my fellow veterans, your knowledge and experience are not outdated relics to be apologetic about. They're valuable assets that our organizations desperately need. Don't let anyone convince you that your institutional knowledge is less important than the latest technological trend. The synthesis of innovation and experience had become the core principle of my consulting practice. Our most successful projects involved teams that deliberately combined different generational perspectives, creating security solutions that were both technically sophisticated and operationally practical. The future of cybersecurity lies not in choosing between youth and experience, but in combining them strategically, I concluded. The criminals are getting more sophisticated every year, and we need every advantage we can get. Cutting-edge technology, innovative thinking, deep system knowledge, and the wisdom that comes from years of defending against evolving threats. After my presentation, a young programmer approached me during the networking reception. Ms. Morrison, I'm 24 and just starting my career in financial cybersecurity. What advice would you give someone like me? I smiled, remembering my conversation with Angela during her early days at Premier National. Find an experienced mentor who can teach you not just technical skills, but professional judgment. Learn everything you can about how systems actually work in practice, not just in theory. And remember that your youth and energy are advantages, but they're most powerful when combined with institutional wisdom. How do I find that kind of mentor? Look for someone who asks good questions rather than just providing easy answers. Find someone who's made mistakes and learned from them. Most importantly, find someone who values both innovation and experience, because that's the combination that creates real cybersecurity expertise. As the conference concluded, I received a text message from Detective Ray Sullivan. Bell thought you'd want to know. We just arrested 3 more cybercriminals using methods from the Morrison-Martinez framework. Your keynote speech is already generating investigative leads. The fight against financial cybercrime was ongoing, but we had fundamentally changed the balance of power. Criminals could no longer assume that removing experienced employees would eliminate institutional oversight. Organizations had developed new defenses that leveraged both technological innovation and accumulated wisdom. 6 months later, I received an unexpected letter from Marcus Wright in federal prison. In careful handwriting, he wrote, Ms. Morrison, I know I have no right to contact you, and I understand if you don't respond to this letter, but I wanted you to know that I've spent the past 3 years thinking about the mistakes I made and the people I hurt. I was wrong about everything. About the value of experience, about the importance of institutional knowledge, and about the consequences of my actions. I let arrogance and greed blind me to basic human decency. I can't undo the damage I caused, but I wanted you to know that I finally understand why you fought so hard to stop me. Your dedication to protecting innocent people and preserving institutional integrity is something I should have learned from rather than dismissed. I hope the work you're doing now helps prevent other young executives from making the catastrophic mistakes I made. I never responded to the letter, but I kept it as a reminder of how destructive arrogance and ageism could be when combined with positions of power. Marcus had been a cautionary tale. Brilliant but lacking wisdom, innovative but dismissive of experience, ambitious but ultimately destructive. The real lesson of the premier national case wasn't about technology or even cybersecurity. It was about the fundamental importance of respecting experience while embracing innovation, of valuing institutional knowledge while remaining open to change, and of understanding that true strength comes from combining different perspectives rather than dismissing them. In cybersecurity, as in life, the most dangerous vulnerabilities often arise not from technological failures, but from human arrogance and the foolish belief that experience has no value. Marcus Wright had learned that lesson too late, but through the changes his crimes had sparked, thousands of other young professionals would hopefully learn it in time to make better choices. Experience isn't the enemy of innovation. It's the foundation that makes sustainable innovation possible. That was the lesson Marcus had refused to learn, and it was the truth that had ultimately brought him down. As I reflected on the journey from that forced retirement to my current success, I realized that Marcus had been inadvertently right about one thing: I was indeed too old for his kind of tech. The kind that prioritized shortcuts over security, arrogance over wisdom, and profit over people. But I was exactly the right age for the kind of technology that actually mattered, the kind that protected innocent people, preserved institutional integrity, and combined innovation with accumulated wisdom to create something stronger than either could achieve alone. That was the real victory, and it was worth every difficult moment of the fight. Now, I have a question for you. Have you ever experienced age discrimination in your workplace? Or witnessed someone being dismissed simply because they were considered too old for new technology? How do you think organizations can better balance innovation with the value of institutional knowledge? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear about your experiences and insights. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help others discover it. Subscribe to stay updated on stories about workplace justice and standing up for what's right. And please share this with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the power of experience and the importance of fighting back against unfair treatment. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that your experience and knowledge are valuable assets that should never be dismissed or discarded. Keep fighting for what's right. Keep learning and growing, and remember that sometimes the best revenge is simply proving them wrong through your continued success and integrity. Until next time, stay strong and keep protecting what matters most.